Midnight struck. Rain slashed across Westfield's deserted streets. Lucas Mitchell gripped his Ford steering wheel, exhausted from another brutal night shift at Reed Industries. 11:47 p.m. exactly. The Rosewood Bar's neon sign flickered through his windshield when he saw her. Cassandra Reed, his CEO, the woman who commanded boardrooms with surgical precision, now crumpled against her black Mercedes like discarded silk. One Louboutin heel abandoned on wet asphalt. Designer jacket soaked through. Her usually immaculate blonde hair hung in tangled strands across tear-streaked cheeks. An empty whiskey bottle rolled from her trembling fingers. She clutched a crumpled newspaper, its headline bleeding in the rain. Her lips moved in desperate whispers. "Isabella, forgive me." Lucas's engine idled. His hand froze on the gear shift. Every instinct screamed to drive away, to mind his own business, to remember his place in her world. But something in her broken posture shattered every boundary between CEO and worker. He had no idea that saving her would reveal a truth that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his own daughter. The rain drummed harder against his windshield as Lucas pulled over. His work boots splashed through puddles, the cold water seeping through worn leather. The scent of wet asphalt mixed with expensive perfume and cheaper whiskey. Up close, Cassandra Reed looked nothing like the Ice Queen who'd laid off 30 workers last Christmas without blinking. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers. Her Cartier watch caught the streetlight, a beacon of wealth against her desperate vulnerability. The newspaper in her lap bore today's date and a headline that made Lucas's stomach twist. 3-year legal battle officially ends. No survivors found. Her fingers traced the soggy words like they might rearrange themselves into better news. She didn't look up when his shadow fell across her. Instead, she pressed the soggy paper closer to her chest and whispered to someone who wasn't there. "Isabella would be 11 today." She breathed, her voice carrying the texture of broken glass. "Just like—" Her voice cracked, shattered, rebuilt itself just enough to break again. The rain plastered her designer blouse against her skin, transforming silk into something fragile and transparent. Lucas crouched down, rain soaking through his worn denim jacket. The cold concrete bit through his knees. "Mom, are you hurt?" His voice cut through the storm's symphony. Cassandra's head snapped up with predatory quickness. Her eyes, usually sharp enough to cut through steel, now swam unfocused in pools of smeared makeup. For 3 seconds, she stared at him like he was a ghost materialized from her deepest regrets. Then recognition flickered behind the alcohol haze. You work for me." It wasn't a question. Even drunk, even broken, she catalogued faces, filed away information, stored details in compartments labeled useful or disposable. Lucas nodded slowly. Night shift, packaging department. He didn't expect her to remember. CEOs didn't memorize factory workers. They saw uniforms, not faces. Numbers on spreadsheets, not names on paychecks. But something shifted in her expression like tectonic plates finding new alignment. Her fingers loosened their death grip on the newspaper, letting rain wash away ink and headlines. "What's your name?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither expected to cross. Her voice carried undertones he couldn't identify. Hunger, recognition, fear. Lucas Mitchell. The name hit her like a physical blow delivered by invisible hands. She flinched backward, nearly losing her balance on the wet asphalt. Her pupils dilated until they nearly swallowed the blue completely. Her breathing quickened to short, sharp gasps. For reasons Lucas couldn't fathom, his ordinary name had just turned her world upside down. "Mitchell," she repeated, tasting each syllable like poison that might also be medicine. Her eyes darted across his face, searching for something he didn't understand, cataloguing features, comparing measurements against some internal template. Do you have children?" The question came out strangled, desperate, like someone asking if the parachute had been packed correctly. Lucas hesitated. Sharing personal details with your CEO felt like crossing enemy lines without proper intel. But the vulnerability in her voice stripped away corporate hierarchy, reduced them both to just two people caught in a storm. A daughter, 11 years old. The words escaped before he could stop them. Cassandra's face went white, paper white, ghost white, hospital sheet white. She gripped the Mercedes door handle so hard her knuckles cracked audibly in the night air. "What's her name?" The whisper barely reached him through the rain's percussion. Her entire body seemed to lean forward, as if his answer might save or damn her. "Zoe." Lightning flashed across the sky like God taking a photograph. Thunder rolled through the valley 3 seconds later, and Cassandra Reed, the woman who'd built an empire on ruthless decisions and ice-cold calculations, collapsed completely. Her body folded inward like origami in reverse. Sobs racked her shoulders with violent tremors. The newspaper fell from her hands, revealing the rest of the headline. "Missing child case closed after 3 years. Father and daughter presumed dead." Lucas caught her before she hit the asphalt. Her designer jacket felt fragile as tissue paper in his calloused hands, damp silk that might disintegrate at any moment. She weighed nothing, less than nothing, as if grief had hollowed out everything substantial inside her. "I need to get you home," he said, his voice cutting through her breakdown like an anchor dropped in churning water. She nodded without looking at him, without arguing, without the imperious commands he'd expected from someone who ordered around hundreds of employees. She just handed him her keys with trembling fingers and whispered an address he recognized from the wealthy hillside district. The keys felt warm from her palm, expensive metal that probably cost more than his monthly rent. As he helped her into the passenger seat, she clutched his wrist with surprising strength. Her manicured nails dug crescents into his skin. "What does she look like?" "Your Zoe?" The question made his chest tighten like someone was adjusting screws around his ribs. Why would his boss care about his daughter? Why did her eyes hold such raw hunger, like someone who'd been starving for years? But her desperation felt too genuine to ignore. Blonde hair, blue eyes, loves math puzzles and piano music she's never heard before. Each word seemed to cut deeper into Cassandra's already shattered composure. Her grip on his wrist tightened until he could feel his pulse beating against her fingers. The drive to her mansion passed in loaded silence, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers. Cassandra stared out the rain-streaked window, occasionally murmuring fragments that made no sense to him. The hospital said, "But I never believed. 3 years of searching." Her voice drifted in and out like a radio signal losing strength. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against worn plastic. Whatever was happening here ran deeper than a CEO having a bad night. This felt like watching someone's entire foundation crumble in real time. When they reached her address, the house loomed dark and empty against the storm clouds. No lights, no warmth, just expensive architecture that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. He helped her to the front door, noting how she fumbled with the alarm code. Her fingers shook as she punched in 4 numbers, 8, 1, 5, 7. She caught his confused look and whispered, August 15th. Her birthday. Lucas froze. August 15th was Zoe's birthday too. But before he could process this impossible coincidence, Cassandra was already stumbling inside, leaving him standing in the rain with questions that had no logical answers. The foyer beyond the door gleamed with marble and crystal, but felt cold as a morgue. He followed her inside, water dripping from his jacket onto floors that probably cost more than his annual salary. The living room screamed of wealth and whispered of loneliness. Awards lined the walls like tombstones marking dead achievements. Business magazines featuring her face lay scattered on coffee tables, glossy reminders of a public persona that seemed miles away from the broken woman he'd found tonight. But nowhere did he see family photos, personal touches, signs of a life beyond corporate conquest. The space felt like a showroom where no one actually lived. Cassandra collapsed onto a white leather sofa and buried her face in her hands. I should offer you money, she said through her fingers, her voice carrying bitter self-awareness. That's what people expect. Payment for services rendered. The admission hung between them like a confession. Lucas remained standing, water still dripping from his clothes onto her pristine floors. I don't want your money. The admission surprised them both. In his world, you always needed money. Always took what was offered because tomorrow might offer nothing. But something about this situation felt too raw for simple transactions. She looked up, studying his face with newfound intensity. Her makeup was completely ruined now, revealing the woman beneath the corporate mask. Then what do you want? The question felt like a test, a challenge, a dare wrapped in desperation. Lucas thought of his cramped apartment where Zoe waited, probably asleep at their second-hand kitchen table with homework scattered around her. A chance for my daughter to have opportunities I can't give her. Cassandra's eyes sharpened. The executive was returning, pushing through the grief like steel through silk. What kind of opportunities? Her words cut precise and clean, despite the alcohol still swimming in her system. The CEO was reassembling herself piece by piece, even as her personal world lay in ruins. Lucas chose his next words carefully, aware that he was negotiating with someone whose decisions affected hundreds of lives. She's brilliant at mathematics, top of her class by miles, but the advanced programs cost more than I make in 6 months. He expected dismissal, expected her to wave him away with vague promises that would evaporate with sobriety. Instead, Cassandra leaned forward with predatory focus, the same expression he'd seen in company videos when she announced acquisitions. How long have you been her father? The question felt like stepping into quicksand. Why phrase it that way? Why not ask how old Zoe was or what grade she attended? Since she was 8, he answered honestly, though honesty felt dangerous in this marble and crystal mausoleum. After my wife died. The admission hung between them like a confession to crimes he didn't know he'd committed. Cassandra's breathing changed, became shallow, urgent, like someone trying to breathe through water. Your wife, what was her name? Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Lucas's throat constricted. Even 3 years later, Speaking Rachel's name felt like swallowing glass shards. Rachel. She died in a car accident. Each word carved deeper into old wounds. Cassandra stood abruptly, nearly losing her balance on legs that seemed uncertain they could support her weight. She crossed to a window that overlooked Westfield's sleeping valley and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Where? The single word carried the weight of mountains, of continents shifting beneath the surface of normal conversation. Boston area, September 21st, 2021. Lucas watched her shoulders tense like someone had just told her the building was on fire. Watched her hands flatten against the window frame until her fingertips went white. There was another car involved. He continued, each word feeling like he was defusing a bomb with trembling hands. A child in the back seat. Rachel pulled the kid out before... He couldn't finish, never could. The memory lived in his throat like broken glass, cutting him every time he tried to speak it. Cassandra spun around, eyes wide with something beyond shock, something approaching terror. What happened to the child? Her voice barely registered above the rain pattering against the windows. Survived. Had amnesia from the head trauma. No family came forward, so social services. He shrugged helplessly, remembering those horrible weeks of paperwork and court appearances. They placed her with us. Rachel had saved her life. It felt like a sign. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock and Cassandra's ragged breathing. She backed against the window, one hand pressed to her chest like she was trying to keep her heart from exploding through her ribs. Her face had gone beyond pale into something approaching transparent. "The child," she whispered, and her voice carried undertones of prayer and curse and desperate hope all twisted together. "What did she look like when you found her?" Lucas's mouth went dry. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. This was reconnaissance, investigation, the search for evidence that might prove or disprove something too terrible to name. Blonde, blue eyes, maybe 8 years old. She couldn't remember her real name, so He stopped. The expression on Cassandra's face looked like watching someone fall off a cliff in slow motion. Like seeing the moment when hope transforms into certainty, and certainty transforms into devastation. "We called her Zoe." The name detonated like a bomb in the space between them. Cassandra's legs gave out. She slid down the window until she hit the floor, a broken puppet with cut strings. Her designer clothes pooled around her like spilled paint. "Show me," she gasped, her voice barely human now. "Show me a picture." Her hands reached towards him like someone drowning, grasping for any solid thing in an ocean of collapsing reality. Lucas pulled out his phone with trembling fingers that suddenly felt too large for the task. The wallpaper displayed Zoe's school photo from last month. Blonde hair caught in afternoon sunlight, blue eyes sparkling with mischief and intelligence and the particular confidence that came from being loved without question. The same face that had smiled at him over breakfast for 3 years. That had helped him learn to live again after Rachel's death. Cassandra took the phone with reverent hands like someone accepting a holy relic, studied the screen like she was memorizing sacred text. Her fingers traced the glass surface, outlining features that seemed to rearrange her entire understanding of the universe. "Isabella," she breathed. The name fell from her lips like a prayer, like a curse, like the answer to every question Lucas had never thought to ask. "Her real name is Isabella Reed." The phone clattered to the hardwood floor, Neither of them moved to pick it up. Lucas felt the world tilting beneath his feet, like he was standing on a ship in rough seas. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, washing away everything solid and reliable about his existence. That's impossible. But even as he said it, pieces were clicking into place with horrible precision. Zoe's inexplicable knowledge of classical music, her nightmares about the other place that she could never quite describe. The way she sometimes stared at Cassandra during company broadcasts with strange recognition flickering behind her eyes. The custody battle, Cassandra continued, her voice hollow as wind through broken windows. My ex-husband took her after the court ruling, disappeared completely. I hired investigators, offered rewards, called in every favor I'd accumulated in 20 years of business. She looked up at Lucas with eyes that had seen hell and mapped its geography. 3 years of searching, 3 years of hoping she was still alive somewhere, 3 years of imagining reunions that would never happen. Her laugh held no humor, only the sharp edge of hysteria barely contained. And yesterday, the private detective finally called with news. They'd found the wreckage of Richard's car at the bottom of a ravine outside Boston. 2 skeletons inside. Lucas felt his knees threatening to buckle. The newspaper headline, he realized. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, like hearing himself speak through deep water. Cassandra nodded. Case closed. No survivors found. They thought she died with her father in the accident. She stood slowly, using the window frame for support like someone learning to walk again. They were half right. Isabella died that night. But Zoe... She turned to face him fully, and her expression held terrible clarity. Zoe lived, with the man who proved more of a father in 3 years than I managed in 8. The accusation hung unspoken, but clear as crystal. Lucas shook his head violently. This is crazy. Zoe is my daughter. But doubt crept in like floodwater, finding cracks in a foundation he'd thought was solid. The timeline matched, the location matched, and those blue eyes that had haunted his dreams since Rachel's death suddenly carried the weight of a different kind of loss. DNA doesn't lie, Cassandra said quietly. She moved to a mahogany desk that looked like it belonged in a museum, and withdrew an envelope from the top drawer. I had samples tested from her scholarship application. Hair follicles from her hairbrush during the interview. Lucas stared at the envelope like it contained explosives, which, in a way, it did. The power to detonate his entire understanding of fatherhood and family and the past 3 years of his life. You tested my daughter's DNA without permission. The violation should have made him furious, should have sent him storming out into the rain with righteous anger as his shield. Instead, he felt numb, disconnected, like watching his life implode from a great distance. Our daughter, Cassandra corrected softly. The possessive pronoun landed like a gut punch delivered by someone wearing brass knuckles. I needed to know. Had to know. When I saw her school records, when I heard her birthday mentioned during the scholarship interview. She extended the envelope toward him, with hands that shook like autumn leaves. August 15th. Same as Isabella. Same blonde hair. Same brilliant mind that soaks up mathematics like sunlight. Lucas made no move to take the papers. Taking them would make this real, would transform his world from solid ground into shifting sand that might swallow him whole. What do you want from me? The question came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by emotions he couldn't name. Cassandra's face crumpled slightly. the executive mask slipping to reveal something far more vulnerable underneath. "I don't know," she admitted with brutal honesty. "For 3 years, I've dreamed of finding her. Planned what I would say, how I would explain the divorce, the custody battle, the reasons I wasn't there to protect her." She paused, seeming to gather fragments of courage from the wreckage around them. "But I never imagined, never thought she'd already have a father who loves her." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Outside, the storm began to subside, leaving only the gentle patter of rain against glass and the sound of 2 adults trying to breathe around the weight of impossible revelations. Lucas felt exhausted suddenly, bone deep, soul tired, heart weary in ways that sleep could never fix. "She's happy," he said finally, and the words felt like both victory and surrender. "Zoe is happy with me. With our life. I know." Cassandra's voice carried the weight of 1,000 surrenders. "I've watched you together. At the grocery store, at her school concerts, outside the movie theater on Friday nights." The confession felt like bleeding out in real time. "You've been watching us?" Lucas's voice sharpened, protective instincts flaring like struck matches. But Cassandra held up one hand to forestall his anger. "From a distance, always from a distance. I never approached, never interfered." She moved to the mantelpiece where a single photo sat face down, like someone had been unable to bear looking at it. With trembling fingers, she turned it upright. The image showed a younger Cassandra holding a laughing child with blonde curls and gap-toothed grin. Isabella at 5, before the world went dark, before custody battles and midnight disappearances and 3 years of searching for ghosts. "I was a terrible mother," Cassandra whispered, her voice carrying self-recrimination like stones. Too focused on building the company. Too obsessed with winning the custody battle to actually enjoy time with her. She traced the glass with one finger, outlining the child's face with heartbreaking tenderness. Richard was right about that much. I prioritized board meetings over bedtime stories, conference calls over piano recitals. I built an empire but lost my daughter in the process. The admission felt like watching someone perform surgery on themselves without anesthesia. "Maybe this is justice. Maybe she's better off believing you're her real father." "But I'm not." The words tasted like poison, bitter and burning all the way down. Lucas looked at his hands, calloused from factory work, stained with machine oil that never quite washed clean. These hands had braided Zoe's hair for school pictures, had checked for monsters under her bed, had signed homework assignments and permission slips and birthday cards for 3 years. "Biology doesn't make a father," Cassandra said quietly, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "Love does. Presence does. Showing up every day when she needs you does." She set the photo down carefully, like placing flowers on a grave. "You've been more of a parent to her than I ever was. Than her biological father ever was." The truth settled over them like a heavy blanket, warm and suffocating at once. Lucas thought of Zoe sleeping peacefully in her small bedroom, surrounded by math competition ribbons and library books, and the comfortable clutter of a child who'd never doubted she was loved. She had no idea her world was about to shift on its axis. "What happens now?" He asked the question to the room, not expecting an answer that could possibly make sense of this impossible situation. But Cassandra surprised him by straightening her shoulders, executive steel reasserting itself through the grief. "Now we figure out what's best for her." Not for us. Not for our guilt or our regret or our desperate need to make up for lost time. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. For Zoe. For Isabella. For whoever she chooses to be when she learns the truth. The clock on the mantel chimed 2 a.m. Dawn still felt hours away, but something had changed in the quality of darkness. The storm was passing, leaving behind the clean smell of washed air and new possibilities. Lucas looked at Cassandra, really looked at her for the first time. Stripped of corporate armor, she looked smaller, younger, like someone who'd been carrying an impossible weight for far too long and was finally ready to set it down. She asks about her dreams sometimes, he admitted, the confession feeling like removing armor he hadn't known he was wearing. Fragments of memories she can't quite grasp. Classical music that makes her cry for reasons she doesn't understand. Faces she recognizes but can't name. Cassandra's breath caught audibly. She remembers? The hope in her voice was painful to witness. Pieces. Nothing coherent, but sometimes she'll hear a piano sonata and start weeping without knowing why. Lucas paused, remembering Zoe's confusion during those episodes. I never knew what to tell her. I thought it was trauma from the accident. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Cassandra whispered, and her voice carried the texture of old grief mixed with impossible hope. I used to play it when she couldn't sleep. After the divorce, after the fighting got bad and she'd have nightmares. She closed her eyes, and Lucas could almost see her traveling backward through time to better days. It was the last song I played for her before Richard took her away. The night before the custody hearing that changed everything, the melody hung in the air between them, a ghost of better times and simpler love. Lucas felt something shift inside his chest like tectonic plates finding new alignment. This wasn't just about DNA or legal documents or the cold mathematics of biological relationships. This was about a little girl who carried fragments of 2 different lives, trying to build something coherent from broken pieces. Would you like to see her? The offer escaped before he could stop it, surprising them both with its audacity. Cassandra's eyes flew open, wide with something approaching terror mixed with desperate longing. You would let me? Her voice carried dangerous hope, the kind that could save or destroy depending on how it was handled. I don't know what the right thing is anymore, Lucas admitted with brutal honesty. But she deserves to understand where those dreams come from. She deserves to know why classical music makes her cry. Outside, the first pale fingers of dawn were beginning to creep across the horizon. Night was ending. But this story was just beginning to unfold in ways none of them could have predicted. Cassandra nodded slowly, seeming to gather courage from some deep well of maternal instinct. I'd like that. Very much. She paused, and Lucas could see her shifting gears, moving from grieving mother back towards the executive who'd built an empire from nothing. There's something else you should know. About the scholarship program. About the opportunities you wanted for her. Lucas waited, sensing another revelation building like pressure behind a dam. In the past hour, his entire world had been rewritten. What was one more impossible twist? I'm starting a foundation, Rachel's gift, for families who've lost parents, for children who need second chances. Her eyes met his, and he saw determination replacing despair. I want you to run it. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline thrown across an impossible chasm. Lucas stared at her, trying to process this latest twist in a night that had already redefined the word impossible. Why? The question came out hoarse, scraped raw by too many emotions to catalogue. Cassandra smiled for the first time since he'd found her in the parking lot. It transformed her entire face, revealing the woman she might have been in a different world, under different circumstances, without the weight of lost children and failed marriages. Because you understand what it means to save a child's life, and because someone needs to make sure Rachel's sacrifice meant something. She gestured towards the window, where morning light was beginning to chase away the shadows that had defined this long night. Besides, if we're going to figure out how to be a family again, we'll need to start somewhere. The word family settled over them like dawn itself. Gradual, inevitable, changing everything it touched. Lucas thought of Zoe waking up in a few hours, probably wondering where he was. Soon he'd have to explain that everything she thought she knew about her life was simultaneously true and false. That love could be complicated. That families came in shapes no one expected. That sometimes the people who mattered most weren't the ones who shared your blood, but the ones who chose to stay when staying was hard. "She'll have questions," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of parental responsibility he'd never asked for, but wouldn't trade for anything. Cassandra nodded, understanding passing between them like electricity. "We all will." She moved toward him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, mixed with rain and whiskey and the salt of too many tears. "But we'll figure it out." Together. The word together felt like a promise, like a prayer, like the first page of a story none of them could have imagined writing. Outside, Westfield was waking up to a new day. Coffee shops opened their doors to early commuters. Delivery trucks began their routes through neighborhoods where normal families were starting normal days. But nothing about this day would be normal for the three people whose lives had just become impossibly intertwined. Lucas looked at Cassandra one more time, seeing not his CEO, but a mother who'd spent 3 years searching for her lost child. A woman who'd been given a second chance she never expected and wasn't sure she deserved. "We should probably start with breakfast," he said, the ordinary words feeling like the most important thing he'd ever suggested. "Zoe makes pancakes on Saturday mornings. She'd probably like to show you." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears that looked nothing like the ones he'd seen in the parking lot. These were different, hopeful, clean as morning rain. "I'd love that," she whispered, and her voice carried 3 years of longing, finally finding a place to land. "I'd love that very much." The sun crested the hills surrounding Westfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and promise. Somewhere across town, a little girl who carried 2 names and 2 sets of memories was probably stirring in her bed, unaware that her world was about to expand in ways she never dreamed possible. Lucas pocketed his keys and looked at the woman who had gone from stranger to boss to something approaching family in the space of a single night. Tomorrow would bring complications, legal questions, emotional challenges that none of them were prepared to face. But today they had pancakes to make, stories to share, a future to build from the broken pieces of multiple pasts. "Ready?" he asked, and the question felt like it encompassed far more than just leaving her house. Cassandra Reed, CEO and mother, lost soul and found family, nodded once with the determination that had built her empire. "I've been ready for 3 years." Together they walked toward his truck, toward morning, towards a little girl who was about to discover that sometimes the most impossible dreams do come true. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving only the sweet smell of washed air and new beginnings hanging over Westfield like a blessing. Behind them, the mansion stood empty, but somehow less lonely, as if it too understood that some stories end not with closing doors, but with opening them wider than anyone thought possible. The engine turned over on the first try, and Lucas took that as a good sign. After all, if a single night could rewrite 3 years of history, perhaps a single breakfast could begin to heal wounds that ran deeper than any of them had imagined.